G'day gymnastic skill seekers, and welcome back to part 3 of specific strength qualities for unlocking gymnastic skills. Today I want to talk about one of my favourite strength qualities, which is functional hypertrophy. In part 1 of this series we talked about relative strength, training the neurological system to increase our force production. In part 2 we talked about hypertrophy, how we can train to increase size and grow more lean muscle. And today we're talking about functional hypertrophy, and it sort of fits between the two. It takes some of the positives from relative strength training and some of the positives from hypertrophy training, and we get a little bit of a mix of both worlds. So it's got some pretty cool outcomes or adaptations that occur when we train for this specific strength quality, which is what I want to talk about today. Now, personally, I love relative strength training. I love to do low volumes of work at high intensities, lifting heavy weights for low numbers of reps, just feeling that I'm getting stronger, seeing those numbers go up. I occasionally like to do a hypertrophy phase, but it just doesn't give me the same fulfillment as lifting heavy weights. However, it's not practical to consistently train relative strength. It's very taxing on the neurological system, and it can lead to burnout. It also doesn't help us strengthen the muscular system in a way that's going to protect us from injury or decrease the chances of injury. So we don't want to spend too much time on relative strength. We'll do a phase here and there, but we need ways to sort of cycle in and out of relative strength training. Thus, it's necessary to periodize our training program to work on the different strength qualities. So a quick reminder, what are the 4 strength qualities we can train? Number 1 is relative strength, and it's all about training the neurological system to increase force production and force output. I covered this in part 1. Number 2 is all about functional hypertrophy. This is today's topic, and it's about building strength and size pretty much at the same time. Number 3 is hypertrophy strength, and this is all about size. It's all about building more lean muscle, and I covered this in part 2 of the series. Number 4 is strength endurance. It's really about improving aerobic fitness and muscle endurance, and I'll talk about this in a future post. Today's discussion is all about functional hypertrophy. Now, I hate the word functional because it's just another term that the fitness industry has butchered. Many so-called functional training programs are promptly named for marketing purposes, but they do a very poor job of living up to their name. And it's unfortunate because functional hypertrophy is one of the best things you can do for your health and performance. So what is functional hypertrophy? The overarching aim of functional hypertrophy is to improve physical performance. Non-functional hypertrophy refers to gains in muscle size that aren't associated with any improvements in capacity or the production of force. Functional hypertrophy refers to gains in muscle size that improve maximum force production and thus have carryover to our sport and our everyday activities, everyday life. Hypertrophy training is often associated with bodybuilding, but there's more than one type of hypertrophy. Not all hypertrophy gains are equal. This is important to note. Now we know that there's 2 major categories of muscle fibers. There's the type 1 slow twitch muscle fibers, and there's the type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers. Most people know that slow twitch fibers are good for endurance, and fast twitch fibers are good for strength and power. But it's not as simple as that because there are 3 more subcategories of fast twitch muscle fibers. There's the type 2A, the type 2B, and the type 2X. So the type 2B muscle fibers are the most powerful fast twitch muscle fibers, and we target them with activities like sprinting, jumping, and throwing. Type 2A are the least powerful of the fast twitch muscle fibers, and this is the focus of most bodybuilding programs. The type 2X are in between. They can sort of go either way. The problem with a lot of hypertrophy training programs is they target the type 2A muscle fibers and increase non-contractile proteins and the amount of fluid in the muscle. Now, this is great if your goal is to make the muscle look bigger, but the density of the muscle fibers decreases and the strength gains are minimal, if not at all. This type of hypertrophy is known as sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Bodybuilders often use sarcoplasmic hypertrophy to increase the size of their muscle because they train purely for aesthetics, not for function. It's all about how they look, not about how they perform. So now you should be wondering, how do I target the type 2B fast twitch muscle fibers? Say hello to myofibril hypertrophy training. The idea is to increase the size and number of sarcomeres inside the muscle fibers. Sarcomeres contract and make a muscle move. So this hypertrophy leads to greater increases in strength. So when we train the type 2B muscle fibers, we increase strength without creating significant increases in muscle bulk. It's sort of very similar to relative strength training. So this is where functional hypertrophy comes in. It targets the type 2B fast twitch muscle fibers. This is important because these muscle fibers are more susceptible to losses in strength and size as we age. Now this puts us at greater risks of falls, injury, and poor physical performance. Hence, we want to build and maintain the type 2B muscle fibers to increase our health and longevity. So that means functional hypertrophy isn't just for athletes. It improves body composition, it increases our strength levels, it decreases the chance of injury, it increases speed and power, and it increases our overall health and longevity. In part 1 of this series, we spoke about relative strength and the neurological adaptations that occur when we train at high intensities with low volumes. The objective here is to strengthen the signals being sent through the nervous system to activate more muscle motor units to increase force production. It's neurological training, okay? Training the nervous system. In part 2, when we spoke about hypertrophy training, we spoke about the muscular adaptations that occur. Hypertrophy training is all about damaging the muscle tissue so that we increase the stimulus on muscle growth and muscle gain. Now, functional strength sort of fits between the two, and I'm going to call it neuromuscular training because it targets the central nervous system and it also targets the muscular system. So functional hypertrophy is both neurological and muscular, hence it's a form of neuromuscular training. The strength gains won't be as significant as a relative strength phase, and the hypertrophy gains won't be as significant as a pure hypertrophy phase, but the increase in overall physical performance will be at an all-time high. So what are the functional hypertrophy training parameters? Going back to the guidelines in the relationship of repetitions, percentages, and training effects table, we see that the optimal functional hypertrophy range is in the 6 to 8 repetitions at 78 to 83% intensity. So remember, these are just guidelines. They're not the holy grail of strength quality training. Functional hypertrophy is generally moderate volume performed at high intensities. Now remember from previous posts, intensity is all about the weight being lifted in comparison to your 1 repetition max for that exercise. Volume refers to the number of repetitions you're doing in a particular workout. When it comes to functional hypertrophy, we need to understand the individual demands of the sport or the goals that we are training for. So a functional hypertrophy training program for a sprinter would look very different to a functional hypertrophy program for a rugby forward, let's say. Both athletes must be fast and powerful, but the sprinter doesn't need to have the same endurance or potentially the same size as a rugby forward. Hence, the rugby forward functional hypertrophy phase would focus on doing more volume at slightly lower levels of intensity, compared to the sprinter who would do less volume at much higher levels of intensity. The demands for the sport are very different, and the program must acknowledge this. So what are the functional hypertrophy training parameters? Intensity roughly between 78 to 85%. Repetitions between 5 to 8 reps. Sets 4 to 8. Rest intervals 10 seconds out to 120 seconds. Concentric tempo 1 to 5 seconds. Eccentric tempo 4 to 10 seconds. Total set duration between 20 to 40 seconds. And we're looking at around 6 to 12 exercises per workout. Now again, these are just guidelines. For functional hypertrophy, we can use anywhere between the 1 to 8 repetition range to target the type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers. Yes, the optimal range is 5 to 8, but the time under tension can be manipulated to dictate the functional training response. So as Charles Poliquin would say, the number of repetitions done for a given time under tension dictates the training effect. So performing 1 rep with a 20-second eccentric will fall into the functional hypertrophy strength qualities because the total set duration falls within the functional hypertrophy parameters. Now personally, I'd argue that the functional hypertrophy strength gains are best achieved in the 1 to 5 repetition range, although working in the 6 to 8 repetition range is going to be good for the hypertrophy gains. So it really depends again on the goal of the athlete. This comes back to our example of the sprinter versus the rugby forward. The sprinter needs to be strong and powerful, but they want to avoid packing on too much additional mass. So the best functional hypertrophy program for a sprinter would be low volume, the 1 to 5 reps at high intensity. We're talking 85% plus. And we're looking at still the 20 to 30 seconds of time under tension. So the set duration needs to be longer if we want the functional hypertrophy range and not the relative strength range, something to be mindful of. So as I mentioned in part 2 of this series, a lot of calisthenics, gymnastics skill seekers / bodyweight enthusiasts love to pump out reps as fast as they can at high volumes, with no regard whatsoever to the exercise tempo, the speed at which they're moving. Now this is unfortunate because they overlook a lot of the key principles of strength training and they miss out on the strength and size gains that they could be accomplishing within their training programs. The best hypertrophy gains are achieved when we slow down the eccentric phase of a movement. I spoke about this in part 2. Eccentrics are one of the best tools we have to stimulate muscle growth. So if you missed it, I'd say go back and check that out now. So some good examples of functional hypertrophy methods include eccentric training, post-failure training, the 4+2 method, the 5-8 method, the 6-1 method, the 3-then-1 method, and even wave loading. They're just some examples. There is a lot of different methods we can use for functional hypertrophy training. But I definitely recommend if this is something you want to work on, you check out these methods and get a good understanding of how they work to help you increase strength, increase muscle size, and improve physical performance. Now, if you're a gymnastic skill seeker, your next question is going to be, how can I apply functional hypertrophy training to my gymnastic strength training? Well, the good news is functional hypertrophy training supports gymnastic skill seekers because it's about maximizing your relative strength for your body weight, meaning that the primary goal is to increase strength with minimal gains in size. Functional hypertrophy training is an intelligent way to increase strength, build lean muscle, and drop body fat. It's pretty cool because it reaps many of the benefits of relative strength training and of pure hypertrophy training. So you might be thinking, well, if functional hypertrophy training offers me the best of both worlds, why don't I just train it 100% of the time? I'm going to say it's not quite the best of both worlds. If your goal is to increase strength, training relative strength is going to be more efficient or more effective for that goal over the same period of time. The exact is same for hypertrophy gains. If your goals are more aesthetics and you want to put on size, then pure hypertrophy is going to allow you to do that faster than a functional hypertrophy program. So although it's taking some of the benefits of both of those, the rate at which you're going to see results is going to be a little bit slower. Now remember, when we're training relative strength, we're using high intensities, which is very taxing on the nervous system. When we're training hypertrophy strength, we're using high volumes, which is very taxing on the muscular system. Switching between relative strength and hypertrophy strength is a neat way to give the neurological and muscular system a rest. We train one and then we train the other, and we give rest to the neurological system and the muscular system. When we're training functional hypertrophy, we don't offer the same recovery. So we're keeping the intensity and the volume quite high or at moderate levels, and this can sometimes be quite taxing overall. So we've got to be cautious of that, and we've got to learn to listen to our body when we're working through functional strength programs. But we can also think about the low end of functional strength, focusing more on the relative strength side and the adaptations, or the high end of the functional strength range of repetitions and time under tension, and focusing more on the hypertrophy. So within the functional strength hypertrophy, there is scope, I suppose, to allow the neurological system or the muscular system to recover slightly, but it's not going to be the same as if we were doing pure relative strength or pure hypertrophy training. But I still believe functional hypertrophy is one of the best strength qualities that gymnastic skill seekers can train. There are a load of benefits and there are not a lot of negatives when we're training functional hypertrophy. You can build strength, you can gain lean muscle, you can drop body fat, just about everything you need to master your body weight and unlock gymnastic skills. So what might a functional hypertrophy training program look like? Here's an example of a bent arm strength functional hypertrophy program for an intermediate gymnastic skill seeker working towards, let's say, the handstand push-up and increasing their pull-up strength. A1 and A2. A1 would be a pull-up, eccentric, weighted. We're doing 5 sets of 2 to 3 reps with an 8-second eccentric. We're not performing the concentric phase. We're standing on a box or an elevated surface to help us get our chin back over the bar, and we're just working on the eccentric phase. This would typically be performed at above 100% intensity. We'd be looking at 120, 130, 140% intensity in terms of the weight that we're lowering. Remember, we're stronger in the eccentric phase than we are in the concentric phase. 3 reps with 8 seconds eccentric is 24 seconds of time under tension, so it falls into the functional strength hypertrophy category. We're supersetting that with a freestanding handstand push-up. The eccentrics are going to be 2 repetitions, and we're after a 10-second eccentric. We're not pushing back up. We're coming out of the handstand. We're kicking back up to the top of the handstand. We're really working on controlling the eccentric motion there. 90 seconds rest between those 2 exercises. 5 sets is what we're looking at. We move into our Bs. We could be doing some chin-ups and some strict overhead press. We're looking at 4 sets, 5 to 6 reps. The time under tension there is staying between the 20 to 40 seconds of time under tension, which puts us in the functional strength hypertrophy category. Our C1 and C2, these are more sort of prehab exercises, injury prevention exercises. We're looking at trap 3, the head supported, they're a single arm, 6 to 8 reps, a 3-1-1-0 tempo, archer push-ups on the rings. We're looking at 6 to 8 reps on each side, again a 3-0-x1 tempo. This is pretty much a simple agonist-antagonist superset example that follows the functional hypertrophy parameters. There are a lot of different ways we can program functional hypertrophy. I mentioned a number of different functional hypertrophy training methods above. This is just one example we could use. Although there are a lot of awesome benefits that come from functional hypertrophy training, there are some additional things gymnastics skill seekers need to consider. If you're looking for the most effective way to increase strength, then you're going to be better off doing a relative strength training phase. One obstacle we have in gymnastics strength training is the isometric holds, the isometric exercises. We think about planche, we think about front levers and back levers as an example. For a lot of these movements, we need to do a relative strength training phase because the isometric holds are less than 20 seconds of time under tension. The duration of the set is less than 20 seconds. Now, when I'm training a lot of these isometric exercises, I like to do switches between isometric holds, concentrics, and eccentrics. Let me explain. So for one cycle, we might focus on training the isometric hold. So do the front lever. Give me 5 to 6 sets of 8 to 12 second holds. In the next phase, we might work on concentric front lever pulls. So starting in the dead hang, pulling to the front lever, or even pulling all the way to inverted. Doing multiple reps of this, not really focusing too much on the eccentric, just the concentric phase. So this would be the concentric focus. And then in the next phase, we might kick up and just work on eccentrics, lowering yourself down through the front lever position all the way down to the dead hang in whichever variation of the front lever you can do. Maybe it's a straddle, maybe it's an advanced tuck. But there we've cycled through an isometric, a concentric, and an eccentric phase. And we can do this and align this with a relative strength phase, a functional hypertrophy phase, or even a hypertrophy phase if we program this correctly and smartly. But when it comes down to it, when we're doing the isometric holds, we're going to be doing them for less than 20 seconds. Hence, that needs to be in a relative strength training phase of our overall program. And it's for this reason that I often use undulating training periodization models where we switch between relative strength and functional hypertrophy for gymnastic skill seekers who are working towards, these isometric gymnastic skills, planche, levers, and so forth. Now, also, if you've got goals to pack on some lean muscle mass, you might be better off doing a pure hypertrophy phase, but that just depends on the individual. What are your goals? What are you aiming to achieve? If you're a little guy that's been doing lots of endurance training like I once was, I needed to pack on some size. I needed to build some more muscle, condition the muscular system so it could handle the high amounts of force I was about to put through it when I started training bodyweight movements. So it was worthwhile spending some time in, sort of bodybuilding training just to prepare my body for what was going to come. So it's really individual. Where are you at right now in your training? What are the goals you're working towards? What are the best things that you can focus on right now at this point in your training that's going to help you progress to where you want to get to? And that's going to be different for each individual. There's a time and place for training different strength qualities. But as a gymnastics skill seeker, I'd recommend that you spend most of your training time working on relative strength or functional hypertrophy, because it has everything you need to be able to build strength, increase lean muscle mass, drop body fat, improve your strength to body weight ratio, which is going to help you master your body weight and unlock more gymnastic skills. I hope you found this post helpful. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them below. I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy training.